Namaste, Jai Bharat. There was never a situation in Bharat when the entire Bharat was ruled by the Mughals. But majority of the places in Bharat, especially the center heartland, was under the Mughal rule. And this thing lasted for 800 plus years. And during this time, they had their usual habit of forceful conversion. They have converted many Hindus. We were only Hindus in those days. And even now also culturally there are only Hindus in this nation. Culturally. Faith is different from culture. Until you make this distinction, you remain confused and act confused. So, this 800 years of Mughal rule, in majority area of Bharat, Muslims lived. Many were converted into Islam during that time for multiple various reasons, primarily coercion, force. That period, if you think, and please go back to history, travel through history, you will see something very interesting which one should know, that the best situation in which Muslims ever lived is that situation in Bharat. You have seen their abilities developing. Of course, they are fundamentally Hindus, basically Hindus. Whatever faith is transformed or forced upon them, but they are fundamentally Hindus. Their abilities got transformed. You look at the contribution which the way they coexisted with the majority of Bharat in art, architecture, music, they made definite contributions. That is, Muslims they call, but they are fundamentally Hindus. Now what I am trying to say is, if you talk about Islam as a group of people, as a society, then the best freedom they enjoyed in the entire world is in Bharat. They could develop whatever abilities they had to optimum. They have lived with respect. Though this really remains a strong fact that the Muslim rulers were continuously persecuting Hindus. That one cannot close their eyes. Pakistan's history says that आज़ादी से पहले मुसलमान भारत में हिंदुओं का गुलाम था. हिंदुओं का गुलाम था. The Gulami concept Hindus don't have, but Islam has that concept of Gulami. They even have names Gulam, Fadana, Falana. So this is how Pakistani history begins. So they say that Muslims were slaves of Hindus in Bharat. What nonsense! 800 years the Muslims, with their given attitude, were ill-treating Hindus. And they tried their best to make Hindus their slaves. They refuse. That's a different thing. They can't be simply made slaves. They refuse, and that's a different thing. But Pakistani have the different version of history. What I am trying to say is, though the ruling Muslims, they are not in majority. Muslims are not in majority still, and I don't think they'll ever get into majority in Bharat in spite of whatever efforts one might take. I don't think. It's my personal thought. So that period, Muslims, nobody was forcing them, nobody was coercing them, nobody made them ghulam for all these years. That time they existed peacefully because they were living in a Hindu majority society. In spite of the fact they were rulers, they were exercising brutality on Hindus, but Hindus were helpless. There were people, the architect of Hindus like Chhatrapati, Shivaji Maharaj, Sambhaji Maharaj, they were all there. That comes as a reaction, not a proaction. You must understand the difference between proactiveness and reaction. That comes as reaction. And the reaction is the Hindu reaction, you can imagine, you can see it in history. So the Muslims lived most peaceful and, underlying this, most creative life in Bharat. They were righteous. They were singers. They were other people who had developed, who had the ability to develop whatever potential that they have. That is there because they were living in a Hindu nation. Hindu majority is the society. Hindu nation it is. Hindu majority society. That's where they could find creativity within them. It is something like the former Soviet Union when people were communists, the writers went lost. There were no new novels. What kind of novels and literature the Russians used to have once upon a time? How can you forget Father Dostoevsky? How can you forget such people? Tolstoy, Pushkin. But there is only one Solzhenitsyn, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, after Revolution 1917, Bolshevik Revolution done by Lenin. In all good intention, Lenin is a great leader. He worked for us people. But after that, this solves where the Russian creativity had gone. They were under the oppression of communism. So they lost creativity. What great writers they used to have. What great theatre they used to have. What great poetry they used to have. But communism has destroyed everything. Alexander Solzhenitsyn had to flee to America, thinking that that's a good place. But America is never a good place for anyone. That's my personal opinion. Where the creativity had gone, communism destroyed it. Similarly, whatever creativity people had was destroyed by Islam when they became Islamic majority. So, for an authentic Muslim, genuine Muslim, he should be grateful to the Hindus because they could only be creative when they are living with Hindus. They are only created when they are living with Hindus. Otherwise, in an Islamic majority, they will go back to 14th century back in time and go back to the crude and very primitive ways of existing with primitive thoughts and primitive laws which they consider as religious or whatever it is, but they are primitive nonetheless, and these people will go back to primitivity, and that's what nations like Pakistan wish to promote. They have political reason. They wanted to become autochthones of Islam, and they wanted to be the atomic power of Islam. They don't have atomic power, as a matter of fact. They're incapable of creating bicycles and bicycle rotor engine, bicycles, and they think of creating atom bomb. They borrow it, or somebody else is keeping their atom bombs as stockpile in their nation. That should be understood. They are simply custodians, not creators. They can't use it. These people can't stand a war. They can speak, but they should be given Nobel Prize for being very boisterous. That's the only thing they survive upon. So they have lost their glory. They lived in glory at once upon a time because they were living with the Hindus. The Hindus were catalysts to all their creations, whatever they had. And once they have left the company of Hindus, they are lost. They go to barbaric ways, and mark my words. Please see history. Think. You can find out for yourselves. You don't need my help. You can understand. We shall meet again. Namaste. Jai Bharat. Jai Siya Ram.